Hey guys, I hope you're doing amazing today. Welcome back to another Learn With Me video where we will discover new tips and tricks for the violin together. As promised in the last Learn With Me video where we discussed sheet music publishers and how to choose the right one because there are so many out there, I will now walk you through a step-by-step process of how I personally start a new piece that I don't have in my repertoire yet. As an example for today's video, I chose to start learning Camille Saint-Saëns Sonata No. 1 in D minor, opus 75 I believe, because I've never actually even sight read this piece before. I have never observed a masterclass with this piece. I have never seen it live in concert. I only know the iconic beginning of this sonata from hearing excerpts of it. Also, this is a great example because it is a multi-movement sonata, so it consists of 3 movements, and I've actually bought the music and put it on my iPad years ago because I've been wanting to learn it but never got around to actually working on it. And yeah, I think it's actually a piece that is considered semi-basic repertoire. Basic repertoire means that there are certain sonatas such as the Franck sonata or some Beethoven ones or Mozart ones that you just absolutely have to have in your repertoire at some point. That is basic repertoire. Then there are sonatas that are way more out of the box. So the Saint-Saëns one, I would say, is somewhere in the middle of those. You don't absolutely have to have it, but it is still often played and really epic and really awesome, so I really want to learn it. Without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Alright, so step 1 would definitely be to research a good sheet music publisher. It can be a daunting process because there are so many different options of publishers to choose from and they all have different qualities. This is the very first thing that you are going to be doing when learning a new piece, so you want to make a solid choice. For that, you can ask your teacher for a recommendation of a good edition and ask them why they recommend that particular publisher, or you can check out my last Learn With Me video where we discuss what makes a good sheet music publisher and how you should choose the right one for you. In that sheet music publisher video, I will also be talking about why I am choosing the Edition Durand for the Saint-Saëns Sonata No. 1. So definitely check that video out if you haven't already. I will link it down below. So this leads us to step 2 of learning a new piece, and that is to prep by marking. Before even picking up the violin, I take a pen and the music sheets and I sit down and look for 3 things. Firstly, I translate any type of annotation and musical term that I do not understand. For example, I know that allegro means at a lively tempo and agitato is Italian for something along the lines of with movement. I actually use a little musical term lexicon and I will link a different one in the description down below because I can't find this one online, but they're essentially all saying the same thing. So yeah, definitely check that out. If you don't know what a certain annotation or musical marking means, it means that you don't know how the composer wanted you to play it. These types of Italian or sometimes French words really belong to the music. So you want to make sure that you are informed and do your research and translate those little terms. So the next thing for prepping by marking would be that I will look for the loudest as well as the softest spot of a movement. I've only learned this about 4 years ago or so, and I have to say that knowing the dynamic scale sets you up with a reference point on your volume and helps you with the architectural structure of a complex work like this. In a later step of this video, we will talk about structure, but more on that later. The last thing when I do prepping by marking is to mark all the bar numbers. So most editions print all of the bar numbers or measure numbers on the sides of the lines. Bar numbers help you to have a orientation in the work. So when you work on a piece with your teacher, you know exactly where you are and are on the same wavelength. In this particular edition, there are no bar numbers, and that happens sometimes, so I will just manually write it in myself. Especially when I work with a pianist, like this sonata, I need to have bar numbers because otherwise rehearsals are super inefficient and you just want to avoid wasting time on counting numbers during a rehearsal. So measure numbers, bar numbers, same thing. You put them in so that you have a good orientation of the piece. So now, on to the third step of this process. That is to mark the right bowings and the fingerings for you. I put this in a separate category rather than putting it in the prepping with marking because this is a quite big step to do, and it involves a little bit more attention. So I also talk about bowings and fingerings and how to choose them in my last Learn With Me video about the sheet music publishers, but in a nutshell, music editions will oftentimes propose to you and suggest a fingering or a bowing. And if there are none written in there at all, then you have to find your own bowing and fingering combo yourself by doing it from scratch. So you just search and try to find a combination that works well for you. So there's a lot of trial and error involved in this, but it gives complete freedom to you. Or if that's a little tricky for you, what I also like to do is to watch other people's performances and draw inspiration from their fingerings. So of course this is done easiest with a live video performance or recording, and yeah, you just want to make sure that you look at which fingering they use. Are they in the first position? What's possible there? What are they doing in the third position? That kind of stuff. The last option would be that you ask your teacher. Chances are that they have a few years more experience than you and that they have experience with the piece that you're working on. So make sure to ask them what fingerings or bowings they have been using over the years. So onto the example of the Saint-Saëns sonata. The beginning of the piece doesn't imply what fingerings you should be doing. I personally really like the tone of the lower strings of the violin, so I actually think that it would add a lot of mysteriosity and darkness if I did everything solo G. Achieving that darkness, I think, makes the beginning of this sonata super iconic. So that fingering I choose is quite hard to nail simply because it's in an uncomfortable position, but I think it's worth the trouble and I will practice this fingering. As far as bowings go, Saint-Saëns knew what he was doing and it is totally doable, and yeah, it really makes the phrasing of the piece, so I will definitely leave that as is. So I'll give you a side-to-side example right now on how it would sound with the difficult fingering that I want to do and the easier fingering that I don't think sounds as mysterious as the other one. So now on to the next step, which is step 4. Now we have given our attention to bowings and fingerings and have kind of settled that basic stuff. I start practicing the piece like I usually would, and when doing that, I mainly focus on phrasing and the musical aspect of it. So if you've been around for a while, you already know that I am really not a professional when it comes to music theory. So I'm not super brainy about learning a new piece and analyzing it and all of that stuff. However, I do think that you should definitely look at a piece with a little bit more of an analytical side, because it will help you figure the piece out a lot better. So what I personally am usually looking out for are unusual chords or surprising chords or interesting dynamical markings. And in my book, the most important thing is to look out for a musical mood within a section or even just a single note. For example, with the Saint-Saëns sonata, the irregular rhythm of the offbeats as well as the unexpected placements of the downbeats make me want to play this beginning in an unsettled mood. Now we are on to the 5th and last step of how I start to learn a new piece. This step I usually do maybe a few days after I've already gotten a little bit acquainted with the piece and already know how to play it a little bit. And that is to look at the score. This is super important because unless you are exclusively alone on stage and play a Bach solo sonata or some Isaïe solo sonata, you're always playing some kind of chamber music. So when I play a duo, like a sonata, like this Saint-Saëns sonata, there is a duo partner on stage with me, the pianist. If I play a trio or a quartet and do chamber music like that, that is also you're on stage with other people. Even if you're playing a solo concerto, you are still on stage with a whole bunch of other people making music together. Unless you stand on stage all by yourself, you're always playing with people. You need to know what they're playing at least a little bit so that you have a game plan. Now, of course, I'm not saying that you have to know it like the back of your hand and that you have to learn the piano voice as well. Not at all. I just mean that you have to be aware of what they are playing so that you can play together. To think of a pianist as an accompanist is a grave mistake, simply because you're equal partners. If you disagree with that, then you can play with a recording instead of an actual pianist. And just a spoiler alert, that is not the same. So what exactly are you supposed to do though? I personally like to do this by listening to recordings, especially if a piece is quite new to me and I don't know it so well. So what I'll do is to sit down with my laptop and my score and find a recording that I really like. So what I do, for example, is to look out for certain characteristics, such as looking out for unison voicing. So when the pianist and the violinist are playing the same thing together. An example for that would be the beginning of this sonata. Although this is not a perfectly identical unison, we still share the same note values between the violin and the piano. So it needs to be perfectly synchronized and sound like one. Or what else I could be looking at for are dialogues. So for example, I have that little solo moment by myself in bar 19 and pass that on to the piano in bar 20. This should sound like a seamless line, so I have to make sure that I am perfectly synchronized again with my pianist. So you can do this step by sitting down with your recording and do it like I just showed you, or you can just grab a friend and play together. That's probably a more fun and casual approach on finding out what your partner is playing. Alright, so this actually concludes my last point of today's How I Start to Learn New Repertoire video. All that is left to do is what you already know, to practice it and explore the piece further. Practicing, of course, is the main thing and is what solidifies your relationship to a new piece, but all of these pre-steps, they're extra things that give you more of a solid foundation to really be able to practice efficiently. If you liked today's video, please don't forget to hit that like button. It does help me out a lot, and I really hope that my tips and tricks on how I start a new piece of repertoire has helped you in some way. I am aware that I am only one person, so there's different approaches to this. If you would like to share how you start to learn a new piece of repertoire, please share them in the comments down below so that we can all learn something together. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye! The irregular rhythm, the irregular... New York traffic.